The Swiss Family Robinson, Chapter 22, Various Manufactures and Improvements. At daybreak, all were astir, refreshed with a night's rest, to undergo the fatigues of yet another day. After a light breakfast, I gave the signal to prepare for a return to Falcon's Nest, when I observed that my young people had some project in their heads which rendered them unwilling to leave so early. "What is all this whispering about?" I asked my wife. "The boys," she replied, "are anxious to remove the inner part of the fallen sago palm, before it is spoiled, and Fritz fancies we could make of the trunk 2 pipes to conduct the water for Jackal Bay to Tent House. This would enable us to water our plants in the dry weather and would be great advantage to us." This suggestion pleased me greatly, and we made ready to carry it out. But the work required patience as well as activity, and with all this efforts, we could not get the task completed till sunset. It was necessary, therefore, to remain for yet another night in our tent house. On the following morning, we rose early, collected our treasures together, and without loss of time, made preparations for carrying our newly acquired possessions to Falcon's Nest. We passed the places where we had left the sack of waxberries and the calabash cups containing the gum from the India rubber trees. These we stowed away in the cart, and resuming our journey, I sent Fritz and Jack on before with one of the dogs. They went quickly forward and entered the guava grove at a little distance in advance of us. A most terrible noise suddenly reached our ears, which, with the violent barking of the dogs, caused great alarm. Dreading the attack of some fierce animal, I made ready my gun, flew to the assistance of my children, and was about to fire, but upon arriving at the spot, there was Jack lying at full length on the ground between the shrubs, ready to burst with laughter. On seeing me, he exclaimed, "Oh, Papa, how absurd! It is our old sow again. She must play these tricks on us on purpose. Just look here." Half inclined to be angry and half amused, I heard the familiar grunting, and I stepped among the bushes. There, sure enough, lay our sow, looking very happy, with 7 lively little pigs, seemingly only a few days old. We left with her some potatoes, acorns, and biscuit, and continuing our journey, reached home, as we now called Falcon's Nest, without further interruption. The next morning, I rose early with the intention of carrying out the project so long decided upon, namely the planting of bamboo canes as a support to the young trees on the road to Tent House. Our work began almost as soon as we left Falcon's Nest, at the entrance to the road to Tent House, with the walnut, chestnut, and cherry trees. These had been planted in rows, and they were already much bent and curved by the wind. Whilst we were hard at work, our conversation naturally turned upon the best manner of raising trees, and the boys overwhelmed me with questions. I explained to them that many of the most valuable fruit trees in northern Europe grow without cultivation in the south of Europe and Asia, and others in more distant parts of the world. Crab apples, for instance, grew wild in England in the time of the Romans, and in that country no other fruit was then known but common nuts, crab apples, and blackberries. By grafting from foreign trees on the crab apple and also on the common nut and blackberry, most of the delicious apples, filberts, strawberries, and raspberries have been produced there. "Can you tell us, Papa," asked Ernest, "where all the different fruits trees come from?" "I think I can give you a history of a few trees. Walnuts come originally from Persia, and hazelnuts come from Pontus in Asia." "But cherries, Papa?" interrupted Jack. "I hope they're natives to Europe." "No, my boy," I replied. "They also are brought from other lands. They are named cherries after Syracuse, a state of Pontus in Asia, from which place they are said to have been first carried to Rome by Lucullus, a Roman general who lived about 70 years before Christ. At noon, we returned to Falcon's Nest, as hungry as hunters, just as my dear wife had prepared for us a most excellent dinner. consisting chiefly of the cabbage palm. We dined with good appetites, and while resting, I took the opportunity of speaking on the subject which, for a considerable time, had occupied my mind. We had often found it difficult to mount to our sleeping chamber by the rope ladder. Accidents so easily happen, and a false single step might cause a fall. It seemed to me that a wooden staircase might be contrived in the interior of the large trunk of our tree, if only it was hollow. "Did you not tell me, wife," I said, "that in the trunk of this tree you have discovered a hole through which bees were passing?" "Yes," she replied, "and it is evidently hollow beyond that point, at which I have seen the bees enter. If hollow to the foot of the tree, it will help you greatly to carry out on your project." This idea of the staircase so excited the boys that they danced about the tree and climbed like squirrels as high as they could reach to discover from the sound produced by knocking against the trunk with axe and hammer how far down the cavity extended. But this daring performance cost them dearly. The noise so disturbed the bees that a swarm of them rushed out, and they furiously attacked the children with their stingers. I at once determined to remove the bees from the tree. My first care was to make them a new hive, and taking a large gourd, I flattened the lower half so that when finished it might stand firmly on a piece of board nailed to a branch of a tree. I then cut a small opening in front of the doorway and made a straw roof to place over it as a protection against sunshine and rain. This work occupied more time than I had anticipated. I was therefore obliged to put off the assault on the bees until the next morning. The impatience of the young people aroused us all at the early hour, and I began my undertaking by stopping up the hole in the tree, through which the bees passed in and out with moist clay, only leaving room to insert a piece of hollow cane, which was to serve as a tobacco pipe. I then covered my head with a piece of linen, and I began puffing tobacco smoke into the nest. After a while, when all was still, Fritz came to my side, and with chisel and axe we cut away a portion of the tree, about 3 feet square, while I continued smoking both inside and outside the tree till the bees were stupefied. The piece of tree had been cut away was then removed, and the light entered. I discovered that the whole trunk was hollow, as high as the floor of our sleeping chamber. It was clear that we could build a winding staircase inside with ease. We were filled with delight at the beautiful work of the bees, and could scarcely find basins and bowls for so large a supply of honey and wax. I placed the bees in their new hive. As the queen bee had fortunately been removed with them, they settled quietly after a while in their new habitation. Without losing time, we set to work on our staircase. With the help of my boys, I cleared away all the decayed wood and remained in the hollow trunk of the tree, and carefully cleaned the sides of the interior as far up as we could reach. In the center was placed upright and firmly fixed in the ground a strong palm tree stem, about a foot in thickness and of sufficient height. Around this I fixed the steps, formed of barrel staves, in the form of a spiral, to grooves cut in the side of the tree. The entrance of the tree, which I had enlarged, gave us a sufficient light for our work. To this opening we added a second one, as the steps rose higher, and even a third one to enable us to reach our sleeping room, above which, without the trouble of climbing our rope ladder, a long rope was now fastened outside the steps inside of a banister, for us to hold on to as we ascended and we descended. My winding stairs was then complete, and if not exactly in accordance with the rules of architecture, it was yet solid and convenient. We thought it superb. So they did stairs inside the tree that went around. They were spiral. They went around in a circle. We did not, however, work uninterruptedly at this improvement to our house, nor in such a way as to make our work unoppressive toil. Various domestic incidents and different occupations relieved us from time to time, and diversified our proceedings. Among other wants that had to be supplied, candle making was very urgent, as our present store, which had lasted a long time, was nearly exhausted. But a great difficulty arose from my dear Elizabeth. Like a prudent housewife, objected to the use of our handkerchiefs and cotton neckties for wicks. I attempted to supply the place with thin strips of torchwood, and at my wife's suggestion tried to make use of threads of the corotis leaves. But after repeated experiments, the decision was, for the present, in favor of the cotton wicks, which we as might well wish to dispense with them. After making a store of candles, I tried my skill in the manufacture of India rubber shoes from the sap of the cachoak tree. First filling a pair of my stockings with sand, I covered them with a very thin coating of clay, which was quickly dried in the sun. Then with a brush made of goat's hair, I laid on 3 coats of the melted caoutchouc to obtain a proper thickness, and hung the shoes in the sun to dry and harden. After an hour or 2, the caoutchouc had solidified, and when I threw out the sand and removed most of the stocking and then the clay, a pair of boots, so useful and shapely was the result of my boys begged me to make each of them a pair of the same sort. In time, I supplied all the family with a foot covering, not altogether elegant in shape, but most useful. One thing I was most anxious to do at once, for the children often grew tired of drawing water from the river for our domestic use, as they had to carry it a considerable distance. By lengthening the sago palm trunks, which was made into channels to conduct water from the bay to Tent House, I found that I could be brought to Falcon's Nest, the shell of the turtle serving for a basin, as we had long ago proposed. This was an immense convenience. Thus, day succeeded day, and brought us to our own work. We had no time to be idle, nor to lament our separation from our old home in Switzerland, and the society of mankind in general, and of our dear friends in particular. Each of our discoveries or inventions was hailed with delight by the boys and my wife, and I gave frequent thanks to God for so visibly blessing our efforts to make life pleasant in this strange new land.